Hey everybody, today we're going to be talking about the nervous system, in particular the divisions of the central and peripheral nervous system. I wanted to go through a quick review of homeostasis. In homeostasis, this is the tendency of the body to try to maintain a balance within the body. And we've talked before about a stimulus, and a stimulus is just a change in the body somewhere. And the stimulus is picked up by receptors. The receptors bring information about the stimulus to the control center. The control center then makes some kind of decision and sends out a signal to effectors. And when we discussed this in the homeostasis video, I believe the example I used was temperature regulation. So if you get too cold, that is the stimulus. Body temperature falls. The stimulus, the cold temperature, is picked up by a certain kind of receptor called a thermoreceptor, and it is brought to the control center. In the case of temperature regulation, the control center would be the hypothalamus, and the control center is going to send a stimulus out to skeletal muscle cells and cause them to contract rapidly, which will generate heat. That generation of heat will then go back and will get rid of this stimulus. We'll raise the body temperature, and so the stimulus won't be there anymore. And when we talk about the nervous system, we're going to fill in sort of some of the proper words for what we've already talked about. So this isn't really a new concept. We're just putting new words on it. So the control center in the central nervous system is the central nervous system. The central nervous system is composed of the brain and the spinal cord. Everything else in the body, all of the spinal nerves and nerves going to the periphery, is part of the peripheral nervous system. So if there is a stimulus, it's going to be out in the periphery. You're going to feel something, feel hot or cold, feel pain, feel smoothness, feel roughness, or perhaps you're going to see or hear or taste or smell something. All of that information is brought into the control center on different types of receptors. Each receptor is going to pick up a different kind of stimulus. So for example, temperature is picked up on a thermoreceptor. Pressure is picked up on something called a baroreceptor. We'll talk about that more later. But all of this information coming in is sensory information. So it's all coming in. Sensory information always comes into the central nervous system. And we call these nerves that bring in sensory information, we call them afferent nerves. And we've seen the word afferent before. Remember, in the urinary system, we had an afferent arteriole, and that was the blood vessel that was bringing in blood to the glomerulus. This is nerves that are bringing in sensory information to the control center. Now, the control center is going to make some decisions, and it's going to send out signals to effectors. That information is always motor information. We're going to do something to have an effect. And these nerves that carry motor information are called efferent nerves. And we've seen this word before also. Remember, E for exit. So we have afferent nerves carry sensory information in, and efferent nerves carry motor information out. We never have motor information going the other direction. We only have motor information going out. So we can further divide types of stimuli. So we have two different places that stimuli can come from. We have the somatic sensory nerves. And somatic means general body. So whenever you see something that says somatic, I want you to think of sort of general body. All right, so your somatic sensory nerves are from your muscles, from your joints, from your skin, and your special senses. Special senses are your ears, your eyes, your mouth, and your nose. So seeing, smelling, tasting. What's the other one? Oh, hearing. Yeah. So these are the places that we're going to be bringing information in from. So if your muscles are sore or they hurt, if you've anything on your skin, anything that you feel on your skin, any seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, all of that is going to come in on somatic sensory nerves, on afferent nerves to the control center. Now we also have something called the visceral sensory nerves. And we've seen the word visceral before when we talked about serous membrane. Remember, we talked about parietal and visceral serous membranes. So visceral, or viscera, means organs. So this is information that's coming in from your body organs. So your stomach hurts, your liver hurts, your intestines are grumbling. That's all going to be brought in, sensory information still brought in on afferent nerves, but it's being brought from this visceral sensory division of the peripheral nervous system. And of course, because we have a couple of different divisions over here, you know we're going to have a couple of different divisions over here in the motor information area. So the control center could make the decision to move the body in some way. That's going to be your somatic motor nerves. And remember what somatic means, general body. So your somatic motor nerves are basically causing skeletal muscle contraction. And remember the example I gave at the beginning was maybe you're too cold. That would be brought in on your somatic sensory nerves into the control center. It's going to send out motor information to the somatic motor nerves to cause skeletal muscle contraction. So that's one way, one option, one type of effector that we have. We have another type of effector over here, which we call the autonomic autonomic motor nerves. Autonomic motor nerves. And the autonomic motor nerves are going to run things like your smooth muscles. So the smooth muscles that regulate blood flow. So they're in your vessels. They're in the walls of the hollow organs. So your bladder, your small intestine, your stomach, things like that. So your smooth muscles, your glands, your sweat glands, and various other glands in your body. Your cardiac muscle is also under control of your autonomic motor nerves. So if you want your heart to beat faster, the central nervous system is going to send out motor information to the autonomic nervous system, and it will do something to your cardiac muscle. It will cause it to speed up. Now, the autonomic motor nerves, or the autonomic nervous system, I like to call it the ANS, can either upregulate or downregulate your reactions. So the sympathetic division, in general, is going to upregulate your body. This is what gets activated when a bear is chasing you. The parasympathetic nervous system or division is generally going to downregulate all of your systems. or most of your systems. So when you are sitting around and just watching TV, it's going to be the parasympathetic division that is sort of slowing down your heart rate, slowing down your respiratory rate, and getting you ready for sort of general body activities. So we call this one your rest and digest system. So you're resting, you don't need to have your heart racing, you don't need to have your respiratory rate up, you don't have to have your pupils dilated. We can basically digest our food and take care of getting nutrients to the body. So rest and digest is going to down-regulate that sort of excited state and allow you to digest your food. The sympathetic division is the fight or flight. You are scared, you are nervous, and so the body prepares for that by upregulating things like heart rate, respiratory rate, blood pressure. And it does not waste time on trying to digest your food and form urine and excrete feces and all of that kind of stuff. So this looks kind of messy, doesn't it? I like to put boxes in different colors around things to try and remember what's what. So the main points are that the information from the periphery is going to come in on an afferent nerve. That's going to always be sensory information. We're always bringing sensory information to the brain and spinal cord because the brain and spinal cord can't tell what's going on in the periphery without those nerves telling it. Motor information is always going to go out. It's going to go the other direction from the brain and spinal cord out to the body. Here's the body over here. And those are called efferent nerves because they're leaving the control center. We have two sort of different divisions that we can activate, either the skeletal muscles or the autonomic nervous system, which can either upregulate or downregulate that fight or flight mechanism that we have. So let's talk for a second. Let me get a different color pen. Let's talk for a second about the types of neurons that are involved here. So sensory information is coming in, so it makes sense that these are going to be sensory neurons that go this direction. And motor information is coming out, so it makes sense that motor neurons are bringing the information back out the other direction from the CNS to the PNS. But we also have a special type of neuron called an interneuron. And an interneuron is a neuron that is wholly within the CNS. It means that no part of that neuron reaches out to the periphery on either side. The entire neuron is inside either the brain or the spinal cord or both of those two places. And the job of the interneuron is to receive input from the sensory neurons. They then sum up all of the different information that's coming in, and they send information out on a motor neuron. So let's talk about what some of these neurons look like. So the sensory neurons have sensory receptors on one end. Those sensory receptors converge and form an axon. And in a sensory neuron, the cell body is somewhere in the middle of that axon. So here are your receptors. And again, these are out in the PNS, right? So this would be, if you're talking about what your hand can feel, I can put my hand down, I can feel this piece of paper. These sensory receptors that are in my hand are sending information on an axon up through my arm into the central nervous system. And once they get into the central nervous system, we're going to have a terminal end or an axon terminal. And the information is going to go this direction. This is a one-way street. We only go in one direction. So what are we sending? We're actually sending what we call an action potential. You also might hear people call it a nerve impulse. And this is just an electrical impulse that's going to travel from here down the axon and into the axon terminal, where this neuron will synapse or interact with another neuron. Now, going the other direction, let's use blue. A motor neuron, you see that? Yeah. A motor neuron has a different structure. So it's got a structure that kind of looks like this. Still has a long axon, still has an axon terminal at the other end. The cell body in this case is here. So in a motor neuron, the cell body is at the very beginning of the neuron. In a sensory neuron, the cell body is in the middle. And you still have an axon, and you're still going in one direction. In the case of a sensory neuron, remember, we're bringing information from the PNS into the CNS, into the central nervous system. And in the case of a motor neuron, we're bringing information from the CNS out on an efferent nerve, a motor nerve, back to the PNS where the effectors are, so the effectors can do something. Now there's one other neuron we haven't talked about. Oops, where is it? Sensory neurons bring information in. We haven't talked about the interneuron. What kind of neuron is that? Well, an interneuron actually has the same structure as a motor neuron. So we've got dendrites and a long axon and then an axon terminal. There's the cell body. These are the dendrites, which are going to receive information. And then we still have our one-way street. The difference here in a, I should write what this is, sorry. This is an interneuron. The difference here, an interneuron, remember, is wholly within the central nervous system. So we're going to start in the CNS and we're going to remain in the CNS. We're not leaving the brain and spinal cord. So if we were to draw this out, how does this actually work? We would start with our sensory neurons out in the periphery, picking up information about what we're sensing. Put my hand down on the paper, I can feel that it's smooth and it's cool. The sensory neurons in my hand are sending an action potential up my arm into my spinal cord to the terminal end. I have cell body somewhere in here. In the central nervous system, this information is going to be picked up with, the sensory neuron is going to synapse with an interneuron, whose job it is to sum up all the different sensory neurons coming in and make some kind of decision. Do I like my hand here or does it hurt? Do I need to move it? Am I going to be damaged? Do I want to pick it up? All of those decisions are made by the interneurons of the CNS. The interneurons are then going to send out information and directions to the motor neurons. And again, the entire thing goes in this direction. Okay, it doesn't make sense to go that way. So we're going in one direction, and for my hand being on the paper, if I decide I want to pick it up, the skeletal muscles will contract and pick my hand up. All All right, that's it for the divisions and the types of neurons. Come on back for the next one where we will talk about what an action potential is.